Welcome to White Pill Radio, the roughly every other episode version of Theology on Air, which is an outgrowth of Theology by the Pint, which you can learn more about by going to theologybythepint.org, which you should definitely do right now, and check out our upcoming events, what we believe, who we are, what we do. We gather around craft beer and talk about interesting things once a month, but we can't possibly cram it all into our in-person gathering, so we have this podcast every week. And every other week, we have White Pill Radio, which is ultimately hopeful, applied theology. I forgot one of my things in there. Yes, post-apologetic. Thank you. Ultimately, hopeful applied theology, where we look at news and current events from a Christian point of view. I like to say this is blessed talk, but not happy talk. So we've got a lot to talk about in the news these days. We've got EBTs going belly up. We've got healthcare going defunct. But the government shutdown is wreaking havoc. What do Christians think about these things?
People trying to forget the Alamo.
People trying to forget the Alamo. We can never let that happen. So I am joined, as you have already heard, not by Sarah, tisk tisk Sarah, but we've got two excellent guests. So Mace, who are you?
Yeah, I'm Mace Perez. I'm one of the church planters and pastors of a new church in the Heights called The Journey Church Houston.
And what's your website?
thejourneyhouston.org.
Very cool.
Cool. I'm Cody Pogue. I'm a history professor at a local community college, and I'm on TikTok, CODYPOGUE.
And I learned how to make little shorts this week.
Good.
Yeah, I mean, AI did it for me, but like,
Yeah, of course
you know,
it did.
So I'm working on that. So, and you are the one guy who like eats the mic like almost too much. So you can pull that mic like
Pull that
one.
back a little bit.
You project well as well. So
Okay,
it's
cool.
it's good for you. So you're all good. It's hard to get the levels right in this old studio, let me tell you. Anyway, so, all right, White Pill Radio, theologybythepint.org. I think I said anything, Sarah. We miss you. And let's dig in. So tell us, so let's kind of set the stage a little bit. There is a government shutdown. The shutdown, as I understand it, is because Republicans are basically trying to do what the big, beautiful bill kind of said to do, which is start cutting some of the government spending. And so some of that spending includes things like the Obamacare subsidies, which are basically if you let's say you are under a certain income threshold, your premiums would be $1,500 a month, but you can get a subsidy if you're under that threshold, and it's like $300 a month or something like that. So basically, I guess taxpayers are helping people pay for their premium or their health insurance. So that's what an Obamacare subsidy is.
Yes.
And Republicans seem to be saying, yeah, we just can't afford that forever. We need people to kind of pay for their own health care. I think that's what's taking place. Then there's Medicaid. Mm-hmm. And I know that Republicans are trying to take non-citizens off the rolls, immigrants off the rolls, things like that to save some money because Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security are kind of like unfunded. And so that's a concern. So they're trying to roll back, in alliance with this kind of idea of American first, American citizens first. So is that a good summary where we're at?
I don't know enough about Medicaid to know about the citizen thing. The way I understand it, you have to be a citizen to get any kind of government assistance. Now, what could be an issue is if you have kids that are citizens, right? That might be the issue that they're talking about because parents can't get assistance, or I mean not parents, but non-citizens can't. But where it gets like tricky is, let's say that you have a 3-year-old that has undocumented parents. That 3-year-old can get assistance, but there's no way to give the 3-year-old assistance other than to give it to the parents to support the kids. Yeah. So it's not technically giving assistance to undocumented people, it's giving assistance to citizens. There's just no way to directly do that.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I don't know what the solution is.
And maybe the birthright citizenship case, which is still out there. Mm-hmm. I think that's a major case to be decided if you don't know what that's about. I mean, basically, there's a question as to whether or not merely being born here grants you citizenship. 14th Amendment, subject to the authorities thereof or the rules thereof or something like that. Anyway, the point it gave citizenship to slaves, basically saying that these people were born here. Therefore, they should be therefore they should be citizens. And so now the question is, well, what about people who come to America, have a child? Does that child get automatic citizenship? Trump has been arguing for many years, no, that you have to be kind of subjected to the rules of the nation and the culture of the nation, even to be considered a citizen. So therefore, if you're not a citizen, do you get these benefits? Now, I mean, so I've had this argument with people before, and they say, well, people who are here illegally or non-citizens don't get benefits, but that's just not true. I mean, they do get lots of benefits, you know,
Like what?
like EBT cards, like Social Security help, Medicaid help, things like that. That's my understanding.
Yeah. My understanding is the opposite, but I don't have.
No, I'm not.
Stuff
I think maybe we're both correct in
Uh-huh.
that they're not supposed to be getting
Right.
aid, but they are in some way.
Yeah.
You know, you can basically buy a Social Security number.
Yeah.
In fact, I mean, as an example, I knew someone. He's no longer in the country, so ICE don't come knocking down my door. But I knew someone who was in this country, and he was told, well, if you go to this flea market, you know, you can buy an identity,
Yeah.
basically. And he did that so that he could work.
Yeah.
And he worked at a restaurant that only serves macaroni and cheese. Okay, basically. I'm not going to say the name of the restaurant.
But it serves
because
just Mac.
because because he and my thought was, like, of all the crappy jobs, to be a dishwasher at a macaroni and cheese restaurant where it's like sticky macaroni and cheese, I'm like, the dude worked. Okay, so like, I am an advocate for the guy who's, you know, willing to do the worst job, you know, the hardest work. But anyway, all kidding aside, like, I don't know that he ever took any benefits, but since he was eligible to work, he had through a fake Social Security number. My guess is he could probably obtain benefits in the same way. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think if to the extent that that's the case, I don't know that there would be disagreement between the political parties, right? I think we would both agree, both sides would agree that if somebody is, you know, has an illegal Social Security card and they're illegally getting money, then that's not something we'd support.
The Christian question, I think the ethical question becomes, okay, like, are we obligated in some way, you know, ethically to help those who are in our country, let's just say illegally for now, like, are we obligated to help them, you know, with their medical needs, with the education of their children, with, you know, eating food, you know, finding housing or not? I mean, I would say no. I think that there's always going to be a trade-off in any policy question, any economic question. The idea that there's not just an endless well of money. Right, money's a scarce resource. Everything in the world is a scarce resource. So you have to make choices. And at the end of the day, every nation it prioritizes its citizens so that it can better love thy neighbor. That would be my argument. That the idea that you should just constantly give away out of love for neighbor is ignoring the fact that loving them is going to cost this neighbor over here something. And so basically, you have borders, you have laws, you have constitutions, you have boundaries around what you can do charitably for that very reason. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I tend to agree. My only kind of difference is exactly at what point does somebody become our neighbor, right? So if someone came across the border yesterday, I don't know that they're our neighbor yet, right? But if someone's been living next door for 20 years, we failed 20 years ago, but for 20 years, this person's been our neighbor. And I'm just not inclined to say, well, you don't have the right paperwork, so we're not, you know, does that make sense?
Yeah.
I see a difference between someone who came over yesterday and someone who's been here for a while.
I'd be curious what the limiting principle is on that. It reminds me of the pro-life argument, right? Or the pro-choice argument, really, rather. It's like, when does life begin, and then when does human life become a person, right? And that's us on the pro-life side are constantly pressing those on the pro-choice to come up with some objective standard to decide, in this case, when is someone's my neighbor. My immediate reaction to your question, Evan, you said, should we be obligated, or are we obligated, I think was the way you phrased the question. I think there's a slight, I have two thoughts. One, I think there's a slight distinction between being obligated and should we do it? Is it a morally good and right and noble thing to do it? That's different than being obligated in the sense of, like, the government doing it. I'm not given a choice, right? The government takes my money. I don't have a choice in the matter, right? I can say that someone should do it, but still retain the freedom to do it voluntarily of their own will and volition. The second thing, which is related to that, is the means by which. My understanding of Scripture is that Scripture teaches a relatively limited scope of government. We see government instituted, I would argue, in Genesis chapter 9, talking about punishment for murder. We see it further elucidated in places like Romans 13 that talks about the government having the right to bear the sword. right? And so it seems, according to Scripture to me, that government exists to punish the evildoer and to benefit those who do good. Does that include providing all of these benefits? I'm not convinced. I understand the political predicament, right? Which is once you extend a benefit, it's extremely difficult and politically costly to take it away. Whereas I'm kind of sitting here, it's like, well, we should have never gotten ourselves in this position in the first place.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and we'll talk about that more with like this EBT apocalypse coming, possibly SNAP ending and all of that, because that may deal with more of our own citizens. It's not maybe as much of an issue here, but anyway.
Just one other thing I would just say, whether it's the healthcare premiums or the SNAP benefits, there's this kind of have the same basic perspective on multiple of the issues we're talking about today, right? Mm-hmm. I also don't want it to let it be said that like that doesn't mean I'm not compassionate towards the people who have been promised certain benefits, or at least implicitly, conditioned to reasonably expect certain benefits. So one, I want to express compassion. Two, I know people in my personal life that are being personally affected by the government shutdown, and that would include in aspects of government that I would say are legitimate roles of the government, people like serving in the military.
Yeah.
So I just don't want that to be left unsaid.
Yeah, it's a complicated matter. I mean, at the end of the day, I think that one of the things, and we've talked about this on the show a lot, I mean, our nation is in $38 trillion of debt, right? Or deficit or whatever. I can't remember. One is always and one is just this year. I think deficit is annual and debt is total. Yes. So I think that at some point we, and there is a cost to that debt. It's essentially inflation because they kind of print money to pay it off, and then they raise taxes. Our taxes end up going to just kind of like pay interest, right. Like $1 trillion, $2 trillion of interest every year doesn't even pay down the debt. It ultimately leads to conflict. Monetary issues do lead to world wars, and I think we're seeing a lot of unrest in the world in part because the whole world uses the dollar, and we're not being good stewards of the dollar, so they lose money in the process. I mean, every time a cocaine dealer is selling cocaine in bulk in dollars, even he experiences inflation when the dollar is weakened, right? I mean, do you know what a kilo of cocaine costs these days? Anyway, there's some guy in Pennsylvania that knows. He's a government worker that
For the record, I don't.
Anyway, yes. I don't either, as it turns out. But I don't even know how much a kilo is because I don't use the metric system. But anyway, the whole world is like rightfully kind of mad at us because we've been irresponsible with the dollar, but we're irresponsible with the dollar because we don't ever tell anybody no. Okay, basically, right. We want to say to the more conservative side, hey, we'll have the biggest, most amazing military ever. Tomahawk missiles, $25 million a piece or whatever, no problem. F-35, $30 billion a piece or what? I'm exaggerating, but right. No problem. We'll give you the money for that. Endless welfare state, in essence. Of what we pay for food, we pay for housing, we've got public schools, we've got healthcare. Like at some point,
not endless, certainly growing.
Yeah,
right? Which is what I think.
It has to at some point, and basically we are living under this delusion that deficits don't matter, that money is artificial, and that we can just keep printing our way out of it. And so at some point, and I don't know when that is. I don't know if it's when we reach 40 trillion. I don't know if it's when we reach 80 trillion. I mean, it could go on maybe for a lot longer, but at some point, someone has to say, hey, we have to live within our means, or else the whole fiat currency system, which we have, is going to totally collapse, and we're going to see a worldwide depression like we've never seen, and that's not good for poor people, right?
Yeah, so for me, there's one other point that it talks about the Bible. Jesus says, give to Caesar what is Caesar and give to God what is God's. And so I tend to take this idea of, instead of looking at it from a moral standpoint, look at it from a pragmatic standpoint, right? And the question of debts and that sort of thing, I'm 100% for working on the debt and trying to get out of debt. But when we do it, I think we need to be practical about it. And we have to ask, okay, is this a positive investment that's going to pay dividends in the future? Or is this just something that's going to take away. And there's a lot of programs. I think that some welfare programs, especially welfare programs that benefit children, I think they pay dividends in the long run. We pay more in welfare, we pay more in education today, and we save money on prisons and policing and welfare in the future, and we have more prosperity in the future. We have more growth, because at least the hope, if we do it well, we don't always do it well, but if we do it well, those kids grow up and become successful, and so that saves us money in the long term. And I think for me, that's a lot of the idea is, how can we have a society that works well? And I think a lot of these programs, that's my focus.
Well, Cody, that's why you must come to these episodes, because you have so much more optimism than I do. So I want to thank you for that. And you are really bringing the white pill to the show today. So I want to give you thanks for that. Let me give a more negative take. Welfare has destroyed the family, basically. So the idea that, we're basically helping people kind of survive is a laudable goal, and like a lot of unintended consequences, it's done with good intentions and all of that. But what actually has happened, as we all know, I think by now, is that it incentivizes people not to get married, because you lose benefits if you get married. The more children you have, the more money you get. So it incentivizes literally out of wedlock births. And so we end up with huge amounts of white and black people of all colors, not pointing towards any one group here or anything like that. Wherever it has gone, wherever the welfare system has gone, you have seen the degradation of the family. And, I think essentially what we live in now is something like a bailout society. America is so wealthy, we can just bail ourselves out of every problem, except there's at some point you reach a tipping point where you can't buy your way out of the problem anymore, where actually the money you spend is actually negative, has a negative. So I think, for example, I don't know what the exact number is. I'd need some economist to tell me. But I think for every dollar you spend in welfare, you probably end up spending 5 more in social cost. I think there's more of a social cost, because we know that children without fathers end up being, Charlie Kirk would talk about this all the time, because he's always accused of being a racist, and he would talk about just crime statistics, talk about the breakdown of the family. I mean, he talked about it all the time. And he knew a lot more of the data and facts that I did. But I actually think our mission as a nation, and this is where I think Christians, rather than giving people, I don't know, food or water at this point, I mean, maybe we have to do that in the short run. But in the long run, we need to say, have families, get married, be stable householders, be stable citizens, and, raise your children, love your children, and then therefore far less likely to end up being criminals or themselves to be on the system. I think we're in the 3rd or 4th generation now of people who are on the system. Right.
I mean, when I hear you talk, Cody, and you talk about like being pragmatic and other people that would be on the more progressive side of things, like I hear that, and I think that sounds really nice. But I'm with Evan, and maybe you, honestly, that it's not working.
Right.
And I think the reason why I appealed first to like where I draw my principles of the role of government is, I would argue that the main reason why it's not working is because it was never supposed to be that way, that it was never the government's job to do that. Or from a pragmatic standpoint, I think we're seeing that the government is not the best way to do that, that we need to preserve those responsibilities for the spheres in which Scripture tends to articulate it, the family, the church, etc., not the government. So I would say that the principles and the pragmatics are interrelated.
And I want to unpack something you said theologically a little bit earlier. So you said what we should do and what we're obligated to do. Okay, let's unpack that a little bit. So law, would y'all agree with me that law is rooted in morality?
Like human laws.
Like any law.
Yeah.
I mean, any civil law is based on a preference of moral action. So, for example, murdering is wrong. I would ultimately argue that Western law is based on British common law, English common law, and biblical law ultimately. So,
right. I don't know that I would totally agree. I think a lot of it is just based on making society work, stop signs, red lights, a lot of things. It's not moral.
But there's a moral underneath that, right?
Yeah. Safe driving.
Yeah, exactly, right. So there's some sort of ideal that the law is promoting.
Yeah. Right. So the point is, like, what should we do? Well, ultimately, we're going to enact what we should do into law, I think. Now, certain things in the past were left up to charity. Okay, that essentially the welfare state has taken over. I mean, really, the government, I would argue, is in competition with the church. And it has basically removed the church in many respects from a lot of charitable activity. And it's hard for me to say to my own members, for example, give to the church so that we can then go care for the poor. When they're paying 30 to 50% of their income in gross taxes, right? And the government is saying, hey, we'll take care of it. I mean, Houston's about to buy a homeless shelter, as a front door to ending homelessness, and all the food benefits, all the Medicaid benefits, that we're arguing about. So it's like, I mean, it's like doubling up. Now, not only do you pay your taxes to alleviate this problem that the government says will alleviate it and they never do, but now you have to give money to me to do what? To feed homeless people? I mean, we had a debate, in this room with a guy that runs a homeless ministry 2 blocks from here. And he and I have totally different points of view. I think he's enabling homelessness. It's never going to be ended. There's never a call to repentance. There's never, from a Christian point of view, a challenge to a way of life. And so homelessness just perpetuates. And it's not good for anybody. So anyway, law has a moral foundation. I mean, it's what we should do. And so then we enact it into law, and then you do become obligated. Why? Because what happens if you don't pay taxes? You ever found out? You ever been audited? You ever not paid your property taxes? Ultimately, it is the threat of prison, or we might call colloquially the threat of the gun, that only the government possesses to put you in a cage that makes you comply. And so now you have to pay for people, rightly or wrongly, who are getting certain benefits. You have to pay for that. And so anyway, I don't know exactly what the solution is. I think if I were king, I would say I'm starting the 5-year clock. Okay, I'm starting the 5-year clock today, and get your life in order. You got 5 years. You got 5 years to get training, to learn a skill, to get a job, and to have your employer pay for your medical care, in partnership with you, to have a retirement plan through a 401k. I mean, it doesn't seem that unreasonable to me. At the end of the day, we have to. At some point, we're going to have a conversation about entitlements, and no one wants to do it. But I don't know. I don't know how we live with this demographic bomb, where the boomers are all retiring, and they didn't. None of us are having enough children to pay for them. Right. So what do you do?
Hey guys, Sarah Stone here. Sorry to interrupt what I'm sure is a riveting podcast episode, but Theology by the Pint needs your help to continue providing these podcasts, offering our in-person events, and growing so we can bring thoughtful conversation and the hope of the gospel to a world that's increasingly walking away from church and from faith. Now that we're a 501c3 nonprofit, all donations are tax deductible, so we've crunched the numbers, and if each listener of this episode gave just $1 for each episode you listen to, we'd put a huge dent in our annual budget. So consider giving today. Go to theologybythepint.org/give and click the link to donate. Thanks so much, and now back to our show.
We're trying.
Thank you, Mace.
Yeah.
Yes.
We're trying.
How many? I can't even keep track. Are you up to 4 now?
Yes.
Okay. You're well. We averaged 3, so thank you, Mace. Okay. All right. No, but yeah. I mean, and I think that is kind of the dirty little secret. And honestly, I think that's why immigrants are invited here, and that's why I think they're invited into the rest of the West from other parts of the world. Bring them in as laborers when they're young and healthy. They're not a drain on the healthcare system generally because they're not going to the doctor very much, but they're working. And yes, they're at least consumers because they have to consume if they live here, but they also are probably paying some kind of tax. So I just feel like that's our only path forward. Like at some point, someone's going to have to say, okay, we need a path to wean ourselves off of this. And so I think that's what the GOP is trying to do. I think they're trying to say, hey, we think it's reasonable not to pay for Medicaid for illegals. Because that's what and the Democrats are saying that's not what we want, but the GOP is saying that is what you want.
Yeah,
So-
I think I would totally agree with not paying for undocumented people for Medicaid, but I still think, the working family who's working at Walmart, putting in their 40 hours a week and still can't afford health insurance. We have to do, maybe the government subsidies might not be the solution. Maybe we need to require Walmart to help them out or something, but there has to be some answer, because I don't think that just having somebody work as much as they can and then not be able to go to the doctor or have to watch their child die because they can't afford the surgery or whatever,
Yeah.
that's going to lead to, like, it's just not going to be sustainable. That parent is going to become violent. Something's going to give when somebody has to watch their kid suffer.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I mean, I think that you mentioned like the working poor. And so I think that's kind of how all these welfare, benefits started, right? It's kind of like to help the person who can't.
yeah, most of them started during the Great Depression. So,
Yeah.
it was.
Okay. I mean, who can't, I mean, there's not a job for them. They
Right.
can't work. They have a disability or something, to that extent. And so the question now is, well, is that who's still getting the benefit, or is it people who've kind of figured out how to game the system? Does everyone who receives a public benefit, which apparently is 40 million Americans, like who receive SNAP, okay, do they all have like a social worker that like keeps tabs with them? I mean, I'd be curious to know. Like as a pastor, I have like, I don't know, 100, 120 members, depending on how you count membership. And I kind of keep tabs. I pretty much know what's kind of going on with like everyone in the church. So maybe a social worker could manage 100 families. Maybe if it's all they did, maybe 200. So do we have that many social workers? I'm guessing not. You know what I'm saying? So
Right.
so when somebody says, I need a benefit, a disability, a food stamp, whatever it may be, healthcare, because blank. I have diabetes. I can't work. I whatever the case may be. Is there someone giving them the once over? Like, I don't know. I think you could probably do something. I think you could work at like a call center. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I don't know. I'm like genuinely asking, like, do we do that sort of thing?
I know that there's work requirements, so there's like limits on how long you could be on TANF food stamp programs, and you have to at least show that you're trying to get a job. I can see how that could be manipulated pretty easily.
Yeah.
But these were put back in place back when Clinton was president with bipartisan agreements. But I think that is part of the problem, bipartisanship. I think we've gotten into a situation today where Republicans say that all these programs are the epitome of everything that's bad and we must do away with them. And so Democrats end up taking the complete opposite side and saying, no, we must protect them. When the truth is that, or at least for me, is that they're good programs, but they need to be really overhauled. And the problem is that both sides are going to have to give and find ways to work to make it happen.
Yeah. And again, to pick on my own side a little bit, they just expanded the military's budget by like $200 billion.
Yeah.
And to be fair, welfare is a relatively now if you look at Medicaid, okay, or Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, that is like, I don't know, half of the $7 trillion budget. I mean, it's a huge amount. But if you look at SNAP benefits, things like that, it is in the hundreds of billions of dollars probably if you add up rent, help, and all that. But I mean, I would if I had to choose, I would honestly probably rather spend less on the military and more on helping our people.
Yeah. Well, on that note, you mentioned America First earlier, and I forgot to have an article about this. But my very moderate father, who is a cattle rancher, is like absolutely angry at Trump in every possible way because he feels that Trump is more concerned with Argentina than with the United States. I think we gave $40 billion to Argentina right before their election to kind of try to boost up their economy to sway the election. And we're looking at importing beef from Argentina, which is going to hurt American ranchers. So I think that would be another one. Nothing against the Argentinian people.
Yeah.
I have some Argentinian friends. They're great. But,
I have friends who are Argentinian.
yes.
No, I don't know if we gave them $40 billion. It was kind of a complicated economic arrangement. But I hear you. They was basically trying to save the peso down there from what looked like, if not a collapse, a problem. And in terms of the beef, it's hard because I think we have record beef prices right now. I don't think they've ever been higher. So on the other hand, the beef rancher is getting hit from all sides too. Yeah. Like it's expensive to, everything's expensive. Yeah. I mean, it's expensive to even have water for cattle,
Yes.
And so, a brisket now is what, like $70, $60, $70
Out of my price range.
I'm telling you, man, like even the oxtail, that was like, now that's like primo cut. You have to be fighting for people to get the oxtail. That's your stew. And
we're having to cut down on ground beef portions at the Perez household.
I mean, for real. I mean, actually, ground beef is what, like $4 or $5 a pound. So I'm eating a lot of pork these days.
Yeah, Walmart is expanding its Beyond Meat selection. So
I thought that kind of failed. I thought everyone decided that,
it pretty much did.
yeah. I mean, even when there would be like a flood, like a freeze over or something, and people would go like empty out the grocery store, it would still be full.
It'd all be there.
Yeah, like there'd be no meat, but there'd still be that fake stuff. So, all right, well, let's talk a little history, Mace. You brought up an article about the Alamo. We are remembering it. Okay, so no one else can make that joke now. Okay, it's been made. So what is this brouhaha about?
Yeah, so I came across this article, and really it was just more thought-provoking than anything for me. So as I understand it, the CEO of the nonprofit that runs the Alamo Historical Site recently resigned. And the reason for her resignation was in response to criticism from Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who was criticizing her in particular for an academic paper that she had written. One of the things among many that I think he took issue with was one of the cited sources in her paper that I presumably was citing favorably. There we go. Was a book titled "Forget the Alamo," which is kind of saying that for those of us that had the great blessing of God to grow up in Texas, Evan, we grew up.
You can't help where you're born, man.
So we grew up hearing about the Alamo, and it's basically challenging, I would say, in a sense, the version of the story that we grew up hearing in school, saying that slavery was a main motivation of the Texians and their move for independence. How the Tejanos story gets just totally wiped from history. The indigenous people who were in part benefited from the mission site, they get wiped from history. And really, like I said, it was really more thought-provoking for me, even just thinking not only as a native Texan, but as someone who's homeschooling and someone whose son took Texas history. In fact, our very first year of homeschooling was Texas history, and now obviously he's taking history every year. And we're just these dynamics that we're facing. Now, I don't think the criticism was totally fair about the version of the story that we were told, at least as far as I remember. Yes, we heard the kind of mythologized version, but I was specifically taught that a lot of the things were mythology.
Right.
And so I don't think it's quite fair to say that we were given a totally skewed version of the truth. But another thing I found interesting about it, just as I was processing it, is like, okay, let's say for sake of argument, right, the version, the schoolboy history textbook version of the Alamo is not entirely true, that it's mythologized. But there's a reason for the myth, or at least there's a benefit to the myth, that it's esteeming values like courage, right? And it made me think that the same people that are probably criticizing the way that the Alamo has allegedly traditionally been taught in schools are the same people that would point to the Bible and call it a myth and say it doesn't matter, though, right? I heard just this last week that apparently there's a new progressive children's storybook Bible that is saying it doesn't matter if the story of Jonah is true, or it doesn't matter.
That's the story you should have brought, Mace.
It doesn't matter if the resurrection is true, that the point of the resurrection is that love never dies, right? Well, the same people that are saying that it doesn't matter if the Bible is true or not, the myth is teaching some value, are the same people that are criticizing this traditional narrative of the Alamo. I would say the difference is when you look at the history, we can objectively say, this version with Travis drawing the line in sand is mythology, but we can get to the real history underneath it, where I would argue all the historical evidence supports the actual reality of Jesus, right?
Yeah. So you teach history.
I teach history.
Yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts, Cody.
I've read the book in question. I read Forget the Alamo. I'm not a big fan of it. It's written by journalists, not by historians. And basically what these journalists did was they found the most anti-Alamo histories out there, and they conglomerated them all into this book.
The synthesis.
Yes, they synthesized them all into this book. And they didn't include all viewpoints. They just found the most negative. The real historical profession, most of us are guided by evidence. And so there's parts of it that are accurate, right? The line in the sand, there's one source from a guy 40 years later who somehow remembered a story that somebody else told word for word 40 years later, and it just doesn't really add up. The story about Davy Crockett going down swinging his gun, we have accounts from that day that said he probably surrendered. That does something to our Texas pride, but that's where the evidence points. But some historians, a small group of them, make the argument that slavery was the cause of the Texas Revolution. And if that were the case, I would 100% admit it. But the evidence just doesn't really seem to indicate that. So in 10 years before the Texas Revolution, Mexico made slavery illegal. So slavery was illegal in Texas when all of the Americans came, but they brought slaves anyway, and Texas was so far from Mexico City, and it was sending money in taxes to Mexico City. And so Mexico just kind of took we know that's going on. Yeah. We're just going to ignore it approach. And that was that. And there's not sources from the time of the Texas Revolution where people are saying, we're going to go to war to fight for slavery. There is, like, for the Civil War, there's a lot of evidence for that. But for the Texas Revolution, just nobody was talking about that. I'm sure there's some, big slave owner that cared about it, but that just wasn't what people were talking about at that time. So I really don't buy into the argument. I can see how they could get to that argument, but it just doesn't make a lot of sense historically. So I have a problem with that book on that line. I think they were just trying to be, critical. For the sake of being critical. And I wish she would have chose other sources. There's much better sources than that. I'm not a fan of the lieutenant governor getting in and saying, I disagree with my politics disagrees with your conclusions. I would rather him have actually made the historical argument. I mean, he's got to have a historian on their team say, here's the evidence against you, rather than just, I don't like what you have to say.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of big picture things. One is the general, looking at history from our modern point of view, which you'll have both alluded to already, and kind of the concept of looking back at, judging all of our founding fathers because they owned slaves and so on and so forth. And so therefore we have to cancel George Washington or what have you. And, that's not really fair to the people who lived at that time, just as we'll be judged by people in the future based on, the fact that we give our children phones when they're 7 years old or something like that. Can you believe those barbarians? They gave their children a heroin a device called an iPhone, because they would never do that in the future, obviously, because they'll be enlightened. And then the other one is this kind of concept of saying that professional educators. Let's see. Philosophically, I do not believe it is the role of politicians to determine what professional educators can or should teach in the classroom. Okay, well, I mean, it kind of is the role of politicians because, in theory, they are elected, at a local level, to kind of say, well, this is who we are and this is what we're about. And, if you're from everything from a school board race to a state rep race or whatever, you're kind of saying, I mean, sometimes this comes up, right? Like our schools are teaching blank and I'm against that and I'll vote against that or whatever. So, like, the idea that, like, politicians have no say is, I think, silly. Now, Dan Patrick is a little bombastic, perhaps, and I will say this though. The governor of Louisiana literally just said the guy that runs LSU sports program will not be allowed to hire the next head coach of their football team. I'm like, okay, that is some political involvement. Okay, like the governor is like, yeah, we got to fire the coach, and and the guy who runs the sports program, who, by the way, also are any Aggies here? You guys? No. Okay. Yeah. He's the same guy that got Jimbo Fisher at A&M, and then they gave him a $73 million buyout. Anyway, okay. The point is that I think that professional educators, and I know I've actually got two in the room with me right now, they think they have this kind of monopoly on education. They think that because they have a degree in education that they are automatically endowed with wisdom about educating children. And that's exactly kind of why I left the school system, because I actually reject the philosophy of education that most professional educators possess. So it's an appeal to authority, essentially, which I don't think is always the wrong thing to do. Mm-hmm. But in this case, especially, it just so happens that the field of education is, 90% left, left of center probably, And so the idea is that they kind of control history in many respects. They kind of control these disciplines, and I fundamentally reject that. So anyway.
Yeah.
I think that was my, the reason why I said it was just thought provoking, because we're sitting here now, homeschoolers, having these conversations where, okay, if I don't think the truth is always in the middle, but the narrative seems to be what we were taught in school, whether it was Texas history or American history, is totally whitewashed, like figuratively and literally, right? These people were mythologized. We just sweep all the wrongdoing under the rug. From my perspective, it seems like, and this seemed to be maybe an example of that, like the pendulum has swung so far the other way, is that none of the white Anglo settlers in America, none of the Texians did anything right. It was all evil, right? I'm like, okay, we as Christians should value truth. So yeah, we should investigate the actual historical claims, look at the evidence, and certainly, that's what we're doing our level best to do in our family, is we're teaching our children, right?
Yeah.
Is what is the truth? And as from a Christian perspective, here are things that we can affirm, right? Even if the line in the sand wasn't true, there is definitely truth to the fact that these men were, courageous and brave, and we can esteem that virtue.
I'm from Louisiana. What is this line in the sand you keep talking about?
That we can esteem virtues like bravery and courage, but also acknowledge, what they did there was wrong as well.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. I tend to think that politicians should determine the topics that are taught, but when it comes to the actual, the conclusions, I think it should go to the experts. But I think everybody should teach like me, because I do it right. But no, the way that I typically teach most historical things is I teach the debates, right?
Yeah.
This is kind of the basic facts, and here are the ways that 10 different people have interpreted that, and here's their evidence. What do y'all think? And we discuss discuss that.
Critical thinking.
Because I'm much more interested in teaching my students how to evaluate the evidence and arrive at truth and that sort of thing, then rather than just telling them stories that have some kind of, baked in morality, but the stories told different by somebody else. That doesn't have as much value to me. So.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that you do that. And that's the way everyone should teach. It doesn't always happen that way. Okay, well, let's look at this article. This is kind of alluded to it already, and actually talked about some of the kind of principal issues, I think, as Christians that we would want to think about. But this is an article from the Hill. You could choose from a million others. SNAP funding expiration set to hit 40 million people. USDA is threatening to withhold billions of dollars of SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, contingency funding, which Congress has already allocated for emergency scenarios if the government shutdown stretches into November. So, basically the government shutdown means that, these funds won't be available. It won't be on the card. And so what my takeaway is that all over social media. In fact, there's a new account on X called EBT of TikTok. It's like libs of TikTok, but it's EBT of TikTok. And the only thing this person does, it might even be the same person, I don't know. But all they do is basically go find people who are commenting about what they're going to do if they lose their EBT. Like, I'm just going to go to the store and steal food. Or in the case of one woman, she pulled out of her purse everything she had just stolen from the store. You take away my benefits, so I'm going to steal from the store. Or other people, speaking against that. Like, hey, look, like one guy went viral because he said, the truth is that a lot of people get EBT and they sell it. They get it for nothing. Let's say they get $200 on their EBT card, then they sell it for $100. They get $100 for nothing. And the other person is happy because they just made a 2-for-1 deal. For every $2 they give to this, or $1 they give to this guy, they get 2 on the EBT. So if that sort of thing is going on, that's a real problem. One of the things that also has come to light, and we talked about this before on the show, is how these are used for junk food. So the Coca-Cola, in Coca-Colas of the world are going to take a hit because a lot of states are restricting how SNAP can go to that. And so I think those are some of the reforms that ultimately everyone is looking for. But it's one of those things where, most of us didn't know that you could buy Pringles and Coca-Cola, with this. Someone said, I think it was on a show the other day, that in the past, food charity was in the form of a box. It would kind of be delivered at your door. Maybe this was a local thing. I'm not saying it was a federal program, but basically you'd get a food box, an aid box, and it was kind of embarrassing. right? Because there was like shame or stigma involved with like needing help. That was when we had shame. Culturally, we don't have that as much anymore. Anyway, the point would be that it would be basic food stuff, milk and eggs and flour and butter, and, stuff to make food. And now it's like the whole junk food industry is paid for by SNAP. So I think that has irked a lot of people. The fact that you can sell the benefit irks a lot of people. And the fact that it's 40 million people. Is that too many people?
That's what, 10% of the United States?
Yeah, more than that. It's like 15%, depending on how you count, and again, are these citizens? Are they not? And a corresponding article, this was from In Wokeness Twitter feed, says, this was from a news article, African Immigrant Services says more than 90% of its families rely on food assistance. Okay, so this is an immigration service, like a nonprofit or an NGO that helps African immigrants in America. And they are saying that 90% of the families they help are on food assistance.
Yeah. I think I looked this up because I'd never heard of this before, right before I came in. And I think this is specifically looking at refugees.
Okay.
So it's specifically a program where refugees come over. But
people seeking asylum?
Perhaps.
Because the issue with that is that everyone Biden let in was just said the magic word asylum. You know what I mean?
Right.
But go ahead. But hopefully that's the case.
The last time I was on here about a month ago, I can't remember which African country it was, but we talked about Christians from a country in Africa that were being persecuted.
Probably Nigeria.
Right? Nigeria, yes, that's where it was. Perhaps this could be some of those people. Would we support if we're bringing people that are being persecuted for their faith, for example, over here? I don't know that I would be against that, at least while we get them on their feet.
I'm for that. I think that it's very few Nigerians. I think it's a lot of our own people. And basically, it's there's a poverty threshold, and if you fall under it, then I don't know how long this benefit is given, but it seems to be going a long time. I'll give an example. This isn't necessarily SNAP, but I know someone who does interpretation for people who speak certain languages. I'm keeping this as vague as possible. And she frequently does work for lawyers and so on. And she knows, in the case of there was a certain family, they happened to be Muslim, and with 8 children, their benefit was $96,000 a year. 96 grand. And so there are people like the 3 of us in this room who work hard, we pay taxes, and it's infuriating. And this is why, the left, I find it interesting. They still don't quite understand why Trump got elected 3 times. And it's because there are so many people who work their fingers to the bone, the blue collar, who do everything right, who pay their taxes. And then there seems to be this privileged class that really doesn't have to work. Now, I'm not saying they're enjoying the good life, but they have food. In fact, they are able to buy luxury foods. I consider Coca-Cola a luxury food. Okay, I have never, when I was growing up, we almost never had Coca-Cola. We might have had Big K, maybe. Okay.
My wife was excited because Coke Zero is on sale this week, so we're living.
When it's like 3 12-packs for like $10, we're like, all right, we're gonna get the acid in our belly, and we're gonna lose our teeth over it. But I'm not saying I never buy soda. I'm not saying I couldn't afford to buy name brand soda, but my mindset is that I'm not gonna spend $1.99 for a 2-liter of Coke, or what have you, and yet. When 40 million people are basically saying, I'm going to steal, or I have a right to the food in the grocery store, and nobody better get in my way, I'm concerned that we have an envy problem, an entitlement problem, and just a total disconnect between what it takes to provide for oneself. And I do think that while it is a Christian virtue to share and to be generous, it is also a Christian virtue to not be a burden on others unless you absolutely cannot provide for yourself. And so that's kind of one of my questions is as an example, Lazarus and the rich man, we all know the story, right? Mm-hmm. And the question is, well, okay, Lazarus was poor and the other guy was rich. And it doesn't say a lot about Lazarus, but I'm assuming he was essentially a leper. He had sores on his body that the dogs would lick and stuff like that. So I'm kind of guessing he could not work.
Right.
But that story is often like, well, the rich need to give to the poor, or they'll go to hell. I'm like, I don't know if it's quite that simple. I'm not opposed to like those who have a responsibility to help those, but what are our standards? Like what? I mean, at what point do we demand that people also have a responsibility to not be a burden on others? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like, where would you put that cutoff? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So for me, like, I tend to want a more proactive approach. The rich man in Lazarus, I don't, think that he has a duty to give money to the poor, but I think he has a duty to pay his workers a living wage, to make sure that they have access to healthcare and that sort of thing in our modern society. And I think that's where I actually put the focus. I'm sure there's some, people that don't have jobs that are ripping off the system, and we need to take care of that. No question. But my other question is, how many of these people have low-paying jobs that just aren't enough to pay the bills? They're working at fast food places. They're working at Walmart. They're doing the gig economy and doing Uber and trying to make it that way. I think that as a society, we have a duty to find some way to make it to where people aren't in this situation. And I think a compromise you may support, I don't know, perhaps if nothing else, just have government jobs for those people, right? You want government benefits and you can't prove that you're disabled. We're going to have you build a building or something, and you show up to work every day and you do that and you get a living wage for it. And if you don't like this job, then you can go find another, but the guy from that job has to pay you a fair wage.
Yeah.
I am a much bigger fan of making it to where people can earn their living and get a decent living than giving the handouts, being proactive rather than being reactive. And that's kind of what my goal would be. But even with welfare programs, I still see it as the goal isn't to benefit the adults. The goal is to benefit the kids. We're investing in the kids. So the only people who should be able to get it are people who have kids, because we want to make sure those kids have a stable roof over their head, that they have nutrition, that they can go to school, that they can go to the doctor.
Okay. So. I'll take your living wage and I'll counter offer this. You get the benefits if you're married. And therefore we encourage marriage. We actually say, if you're married but you still can't afford food, what have you, we'll help you.
Right.
But we can't encourage the dearth of the family,
Right.
the death of the family.
Yeah.
And so I think we're kind of at the point now where we just need to prioritize the family.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. In my local government class, I can't remember the guy's name. It's an economist from Harvard, that liberal bastion, Harvard. Yeah. But he argues that one thing that is a problem at the local area is the death of the family. That when you have two parents raising the kids, that those kids are going to be successful. And he has data showing that, right? So I'm all for programs that try to help families.
Like when the whole white privilege conversation was going around 2020, 2021, et cetera, one of the things that came out is, well, actually there's a lot of kinds of privilege. So the truth is that a black kid from a married family has more privilege than a white kid from a single family. Now, I'm not saying that, I'm giving as an example, okay? And it may not be that exactly, but there are all kinds of privilege, and that the only privilege that exists isn't being white, so anyway, I think that there are certain European countries that are basically saying have 3 kids, no more taxes. I think Poland and Hungary have both done that to deal with the underpopulation problems that we've talked about. I think we're kind of ready for some creative thinking, but what I'm concerned about is the kind of massive threats of theft and violence.
Yeah, I agree.
If and when social services are withheld. And that's why I have the 5-year plan. Okay? You have the 5 years to get training. It's enough to get a college degree. Certainly it's enough to get a trade degree. Like the work requirement. The other day I was at HEB and the person in front of me paid, Not that I was like really looking, but I know what a Snap credit card looks like. And I
They
just
were like,
noticed-
why is this creeper looking over my
No, I just, it was taking, I think, an unusually long time. Actually, I think there was a debate about like, this was right when stuff stopped being covered. And I mean, I really wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but it was like, oh, okay, well, I'll pay for that with cash or something like that. And this person was like in a scooter. I mean, they're overweight, probably, I don't know, diabetic. I'm not judging. I'm just saying probably not in the best health, but they could work. There's a job for them. I'm not saying they could build houses, but they could work a phone bank. They could work at a call center. I mean, there's something they could do probably, right? So I would be happier with make work programs. I think that's what Mexico largely does, for example, although I've been told that Mexico has more and more welfare programs because it's becoming more overtly socialist in that way. But for a long time, it had none of that, but everyone was kind of employed. And if it was a make work program, okay, at least you're working. Like, I think that's good for the human soul. I think it's good for morale. I think it's good. You can't have a society, though, where certain people are paying into a system and other people are abusing it. And all of these TikToks going around, like, either championing the fact that they have $3,000 in the EBT and they have 2 grocery carts full of a lot of junk food, like, that is infuriating to a person who's working their butt off and who denies themselves Bluebell, which is $9 a half a gallon. Okay. Yes. I wait for the 2-for-1 Tillamook myself.
Yes.
Okay.
I refuse to pay $9 a gallon. Now I'll go to the ice cream store and get 1 scoop for $6, but not $9 a gallon.
I know. Isn't that weird how that works?
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, I think my concern is there's a lot of frustration about it. And if we want to go back to a system, because certain people have kind of said this, what about going back to the church sort of doing this sort of thing, food banks and whatnot? Okay, reduce my taxes. Right? If the government just gets out of the business and we want to go back to Christian managed charity, okay, but we have like 70 years of programs to roll back, and I think there would be a riot, like thousands of riots.
Absolutely.
And that's, I think we're seeing that like just a little bit kind of on social media, and they'll probably resolve this so it'll go away, but it does seem to be like a flare where it's like, there's going to be a lot of people who, we've seen this like in like gangs going into jewelry stores and heisting, or gangs 20 flash mobs going into convenience stores, and like there's nothing to stop that from happening like in mass. Like if EBT goes down and they just want to go into a Walmart and loot the place, who's going to stop them? You know what I mean?
Right.
So I do worry about that. Okay. Mace, why don't you end this show with some good news, please? You have an article from Pew Research Center, which is almost always bad news, but yeah.
Yeah, so another one just that was thought-provoking to me. As a pastor, that was for Sarah.
Absolutely.
So Pew Research Center released some new data, some new research, and kind of the headline one is that a growing share of U.S. adults say religion is gaining influence in American life. There's a corollary of that how they kind of combine 2 questions, and a majority of Americans have a positive take on religion, that they think religious influence in American life is a good thing. Scanning the article, just a few statistics that just jumped out at me again that were thought-provoking. Number 1, 80% of white evangelical Protestants believe their religious beliefs conflict with mainstream culture, which was by far the largest of any group. But a majority of people with any religious affiliation hold that belief. So it at least seems to corroborate a perceived secularization of the culture. 85% of professing Christians claim that believing God is essential to being Christian, while 13% do not. So, one, I have questions. Why do 13% of Christians not believe that believing in God is essential? 76% claim that having a personal relationship with Jesus Christ is essential, but 18% do not. Again, I have questions about that. It makes me think of how they're defining what it means to be a Christian. But one of the things that's contrasted with 29% saying that love of country is essential to belief. So to me, it seems to kind of counter the narrative of this, great evil called Christian nationalism. Well, actually, the majority of Christians, far more Christians, think that things like believing in God and having a personal relationship with Jesus Christ are essential than loving country. Only 26% of Americans believe that one religion is true, 1/3 of white evangelical Protestants believe that many religions may be true, which again kind of baffles me. But at least, hey, 2/3 believe only one is true. By far the highest among any demographic. And then one other one, maybe this is the most controversial one I'm going to cite, is as far as the statistic that the headline was focused on, the growing influence of religion and whether that's a good or a bad thing, 78% of Republicans have a net positive view of religion, while only 40% of Democrats do. Conversely, only 6% of Republicans have a negative view of religion, while 35% of Democrats do. And so, with all due respect to my Democrat voting Christian brothers and sisters, including those in this room, I do think it highlights something that you've been talking about for a long time, Evan, which is the increasing worldview divide between the two parties. So just a few statistics I found interesting.
Very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Hopefully some good news in the right direction where people are sort of open to hearing us out. I think I might have said this on a previous show. I know I did, but younger people are more conservative, so I won't reiterate the point. But, I think that by and large we're living through the kind of failed experiment of I would say leftism at large. I mean, that's just my take on it. And, there's a lot of people who I think are looking around for truth. And so religion's looking better, I think.
I would say the failure of secularism.
Yes.
But I think your argument would be that
they're the same.
The Venn diagram overlaps a lot at the very least.
Yeah, right? A lot.
Yeah.
So I don't know. What do you? The political side of that is pretty interesting. What do you think, Cody?
The political side. Well, I disagree. I think that liberalism, like the heyday of liberalism, was like the 1930s up to the 1970s, and I think we've been conservative since the 1980s. Yeah. So, but I do agree with pure secularism. I think that we look for something that secularism cannot really give. So I think that, secularism can't provide what everybody needs. So I think it's a good thing that people are looking for, something bigger than that.
But why do you think those on the political left have a bad view of religion?
I think they associate it with Trump. I think a lot of people on the left see Christianity as just a tool of the Republican Party, that it's just church is just a place where they teach you how to follow Trump. That's how a lot of people see it. So
I just don't think that happens very often. I really don't.
Yeah.
I mean, Trump exclusively, no. I think what we're seeing is that there are certain issues that Christianity has input on.
Yeah, I think that Christianity made a deal with the devil kind of thing, right? Where
when it became pro-life, that's one argument I've heard.
Well, you've said before that you don't think Trump is a great Christian. What was he saying the other day? He was like, probably ain't going to go to heaven,
Well,
so
our point was, hey, at least he's circumspect now. He's got some humility now. Whereas before he's like, I don't need any forgiveness. What did I ever do wrong?
Yes. Well, but I think that the church has just lined up behind him so hard and refused to.
Well, it's a two-party system. Right. I mean, you look at the Netherlands. They just had elections, and I'm like, what? 10 parties?
Yes.
It's ridiculous. So it's a two-party system.
It makes me think of the Charlie Kirk funeral, where every speaker, I think to a person, mentioned God, Jesus, the gospel. Now, I think there are some that did that genuinely.
Yeah.
Do I think some of the people did it to win political points? Probably. But the fact that there's only one party that's going to do that, right? You had a Kamala rally where someone yelled, Jesus is Lord or something like that. And she said, her automatic quip, they got a big old laugh, was, you're at the wrong rally.
Right.
Yeah.
Contrast Charlie Kirk's funeral with Jimmy Carter's funeral, a self-professing Christian. And
where they sang Imagine.
Yeah. Right? So I do think that there is, even if some on the right, Trump included, do that to score points with his base, the fact that that is the base, I think, is telling.
Yeah. Let's say I agree with you that there was a compromise made, and I know we have to go, but I think the compromise the left made was on abortion, and I think it's been downhill from there. I mean, once you attach yourself to the killing of children, and that's what abortion is. I mean, I don't know a nicer way to say it. You can defend it in all kinds of ways. It's good for the woman and 12-year-olds in bad situations. And I get it. I understand all the emotional arguments. But at the end of the day, that's not what most abortions are chosen. There are women, and maybe by force of the men. Okay.
Right.
But that's what's going on. And so I think that's the compromise. And as long as the left is embracing that, you're going to see fewer and fewer Christians involved. In leftism, you're going to see more hostility from the left toward Christianity, because that has become like the hill to die on. I mean, no pun intended. So I would agree with you that Trump is a very flawed vessel,
Right.
For a message where we get a lot of what we want as conservatives. Not everything by any means, but a lot. But I think the reason you're seeing fewer leftist Christians exist.
Actually, more, but yes.
Okay, I'll have to look. These reading glasses are new for me, so I'll have to look more carefully at that. But we do have to go.
Yes.
So, where can people find you?
I'm on TikTok. Cody Pogue on TikTok.
Pogue.
Yes.
All right, good deal. All right. Well, thank you for
There's
coming.
an Astros beat writer with the name Cody Pogue.
Oh, wow.
but
What?
Different spelling though. So
Oh, interesting.
anyway,
Okay.
yeah.
Maybe it's really him.
The wrong spelling. No, it's the wrong spelling.
It's the wrong
Okay.
spelling.
It's like the wrong spelling of Steven.
I'll check that out.
With the V.
Right. It's got to be PH.
Yeah, exactly right.
Where can people find you?
Yeah, I'm Mace Perez. You can find me at the Journey Church Houston. TheJourneyHouston.org is our website.
And y'all meet at
Lambert Hall.
Lambert
in the
Hall
Heights.
in the Heights. Okay.
The
very
Houston Zengerbund.
Yeah, very cool. And I'm Evan McClanahan. I'm the pastor at First Lutheran. And you can go to FL Houston to learn more. And, of course, go to theologybythepint.org to learn more about what's going on. In fact, our next event is on immigration. So kind of one of the topics we talked about. So that'll be fun on November 11th. Until next time, we encourage you to think freely. What do I say?
Think deeply.
Think
Question
deeply.
freely.
Question freely, think deeply, and disagree as needed.